Good day, grade 11 learners. Welcome to today's economics lesson. My name is Zolega Miegi. This lesson is brought to you by Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Saibono Discovery Center and broadcast by Pagaman Research and Development. Just today's lesson, we're going to continue where we left off yesterday. We were doing the circular flow. Just a reminder, what is a circular flow? A circular flow is an economic model that shows the flow of money within the economy, right? And we said it's either an open circular flow or a closed. When we speak of an open circular flow, it has four participants, which are the household, the state, the firms, and the foreign sector. When we speak of the closed circular flow, it has only three main participants, which is the household, the firms, and the government. It does not have an interaction with and outside the borders of the country, so it has only three, right? Within the circular flow, we also discussed the four markets, right? The four markets, which are the factor market, the goods market, the foreign exchange market, and the financial market. Right, today we're going to continue where we left off. We're going to do the essay. The essay question says, discuss in detail the markets in the four sector model in the circular flow. That's 26 marks. And then the additional part of the essay, it says, how can the business sector contribute more positively to the economy? Evaluate the role of business in growing the economy. Right, as I had said before, in any other essay, it's the same with economics. Your essay must have an introduction. After the introduction, it's the body. The body will definitely have subtopics, which are going to be the market. Right, after the body, if you've done with the body, you then add the additional part, the second part of the question, which is known as the additional part, which forms part of this, which is 10 marks. After that, then you are going to have your conclusion. So remember that it's the introduction, the body, the subtopics. Since we have four markets here, that means your subtopics are going to be the four markets that we have. Right, sorry. We're going to have the four markets as the subtopics of your essay, right? And then the additional part, you're going to answer the how can the business sector contribute more positively to the economy and evaluate the role of business in growing the economy, right? To make everything easier, you can use a mind map, but remember, using the mind map does not mean it's going to be marked as part of your essay. It's not going to be marked as part of your essay. So you can use a mind map just to make things easier for you. The mind map, the first, you can have your factor market, your goods market, your financial market, and your exchange market. Under financial market, remember the financial market is divided into two. It's the money market and the capital market. The money market is for short-term savings, and thus the capital market is for long-term savings. Remember that. And for today's lessons, remember to send your WhatsApp questions on the number. It's 064 748 8913. Send your questions to 064 748 8913. Remember to send your questions to that number. Right. We said it starts with an introduction. As always, as you're writing any introduction, the first thing that you do when you're writing your essay is define the terms, right? The terms, the most important terms, let's go back to the question. It's discuss in detail the market in a four sector model, which is obviously the circular flow, right? In this case, it's a four sector model because it has four participants. That means it's clear. The question requires you to define these markets in an open economy. Remember, in a closed economy, it has only three participants, so it cannot be a four-sector model. Remember that. So it requires you to answer this as per open economy, right? So the markets and in a four-sector economy, we did this. Right, the introduction. Right, and in any introduction, you define the terms. In this case, remember we said it's a four-sector model. You have to define what is a four-sector model and then what it means when it's an open economy. Right, the economy of a country is regarded as an open economy because of the presence of all the four participants, which is the household, the producers, which are firms in this case. Then it's the government, the foreign sector, and the financial sector. The financial sector do not form the four part of the. It is just it only links the four participants in the four sector economy. That's what it does. So the four participants are the household, the producers, which are, we also call them the firms, the government, and the foreign sector. And the financial sector as active participants in the economy. Right, what is the use of the market within the economy? Then the market is used to link the four participants in the economy within the circular flow. Let's move on. We move to the main body, which is the main part. Right, we have our first market. The first market that we have is the good market, which you can also call it the product market or the output market. What is this market responsible for? Remember, we said when firms buy the factors of production from the household, they use those factors of production to produce goods and services. So when these goods and services are produced, they are then circulated within this market, which we know as the goods market. Right, these markets are for consumers and goods and services. Who are the consumers that we're talking about here? These are the households. These are the consumers that we're talking about here. So the firms and the households, they meet in this goods market. These are the markets for consumer goods and services. Then goods can be regarded as tangible and non-tangible. What are tangible things? These are food, clothes, cars, etc. And their main use, it is to satisfy the human needs and wants. Right, this market, it is where we sell the goods in that are produced in the market. Right, we continue. Right, remember in our previous lesson we said the firms do not only produce consumer goods, they also produce capital goods. These are for tradings, buildings and machinery. That's what we call capital goods. That's what also the firms produce. Right, consumer goods are market for trading. It's also for durable consumer goods, semi-durable consumer goods, and non-durable consumer goods. So all the types of goods are sold within this market. Right, and also since it's a goods and also a service, they sold goods and services, also service, which are also known as non-tangible goods. These include the wholesale, the retail, the transport, and also the financial market. They form part of this. Right, we move to the factor market. Just a reminder before we go through this, the factor market, it is where the factors of production are sold. So this is where the firms buy the factors of production from the household. Right, we remember that. Right, then it says households sell factors of production on the market. These are rent for natural resources, wages for labor, interest for capital, and profit for entrepreneur. Remember the four factors of production: labor, resources, entrepreneurship, and land. Right, and then we move to the next point. It says the factor market includes the labor, property, and financial market. Right, obviously the financial market are the ones that are responsible for lending, right, and saving. Right, it means the financial markets can lend the firms some capital for them to be able to finance the buying of these factors of production. Right, the market where services of production are traded, it is, for example, the labor is hired, capital is borrowed, the services and wages and interest and rent and profit. Right, remember that it's where the factors of production are sold. Financial markets, these are not directly involved in the circular flow or in any production of these goods, but they link the business sector and other participants. How do they link this? Right, remember the financial markets, these are the ones that are responsible for providing capital to the other participants within the circular flow. So they act as a direct link between this, which is the household, and the business sector, which we can also call it firms, and the other participant, which is also the government. Remember, the government can also lend money from other private businesses. Right. These include banks, insurance companies, and pension funds. Right, money markets. We said, remember, the financial market is divided into two. It is the capital market and the money market. Right, and we also stated that in the money market, these are responsible for short-term loans that do not go beyond a year. And also within this very same market, this is where most households save their income. Remember, we also mentioned leakages. Leakages, we said savings are part of leakages within the circular flow. So the money market is responsible for saving for the household. And we also remember, we said savings can come back within the circular flow as an investment, and which investment forms of part of what? Injections. Right. We continue. It said in the money market, short-term loans and very short-term funds are saved and borrowed by consumers and business enterprise. Consumers being the household, business enterprises being the firms. These are the two participants that usually lend and borrow money from the money market. Right. We also mentioned that also within this market, the products are sold, which is the bills, the government bonds, and the bank debentures. Right. The CPLAN form exists when parties make demand and short-term deposit and borrow on short-term. In a nutshell, the money market is responsible for short-term and long-term savings and borrowing, right? That's what it's responsible for. And then we also mentioned an institution that is responsible for the money market, which is the South African Reserve Bank, right? Remember that, do not forget that. It's the short-term savings and loans. The Reserve Bank of South Africa is responsible for this market. Then we move to the capital market, which forms part of the financial markets, right? In the capital markets, this is where long-term funds are borrowed. They also save. Also, the consumers save within this sector, right? And also the firms also save within sector, right? And then we have an institution, which is the JSC, the Johannesburg Security Exchange, which plays the main part. It is a key institution within this capital. Products are sold in this market, which is mortgage bonds and shares. Remember, when companies listed in the JSC, we are able to buy shares within that company. So this is where the companies that are listed in this. So it is also for long term, not for short term. It's long term funds. Remember that it's long term funds. And also the JSC, it is the institution that is responsible for this institution, right? We move to the third market. The third market is the foreign exchange market, right? This market is obviously available in an open economy, not in a closed economy. Remember, a closed economy has only 3 participants. In an open economy, we have the 4 participants, which is the foreign exchange, the foreign sector, sorry. Then the foreign exchange market forms part of the open market, right? What happens within the foreign exchange market? Remember, in the previous lesson, we said this is the foreign sector, the foreign exchange market. It is responsible for the foreign exchange rate. The foreign exchange rate, right? On the foreign exchange market, businesses buy and sell foreign currency to pay for imported goods. Remember, for the fact that we're an open economy, it simply means we are able to interact with other countries. That means we are importing and exporting. For us to import, and importing, remember, it is the buying of goods and services from other countries coming to the local country, right? So for us to be able to buy those goods from other countries, it simply means we need foreign currency. This is where this market comes into play, right? Before I continue, remember to send your questions on our WhatsApp number. It is 064 748 8913. Send your questions to 064 748 8913. Remember that, right? Still on the foreign exchange market, we said on the foreign exchange markets, business buy and sell foreign currency to pay for imported goods and services. Remember that, right? These transactions occur in banks and consist of electronic money transfers from one account to another. This simply means we do not have to have hard cash or foreign currency in our hands. It simply means banks are responsible for the transfer of this money from one account to another, right? They are the leading centers, most important foreign exchange markets are in London, New York, and Tokyo, right? We move, for example, travelers' checks to travel abroad, right? Before we continue with that, right? It says the leading most centers of most important foreign exchange markets are in London, New York, and Tokyo, right? For example, if you need to travel, right, you need a traveler's check, then it can be issued by the bank. And remember, for us to buy imported goods, we need foreign currency. For remember, if we have to buy them in USA, you obviously need the American dollar. If we have to buy them in the UK, obviously we need the pound. Remember that. And we also mentioned the flows. We said there are two different flows. It's the real flow and the flow of what? Of money, right? So in this case, these flows happen within these markets, right? What flows within this market? There's a flow of public and private goods and services, right? These are real flows. The flows of intangible things, it's a real flow. Then there's money flow, which is the flowing of money, right? Within the market, there's a flow of public and private goods and services, which is also known as the real flow. They're accompanied by counter flows of expenditure and taxes. Before I continue, I remember there was a question yesterday that was not answered. It was the question about what is the relation between expenditure and goods. What is expenditure? Expenditure, it is the use of funds, right? Then what is the relation between it and the goods? Right. For example, we used one example yesterday. It is where we said, for example, the Gauteng province can decide to use or decides to build a road from Pretoria to Johannesburg, for example. So that's expenditure. So it means they're using the funds to build the road. So what does it mean? It simply means the Gauteng department will have, or the Gauteng province will have to hire people to what? To build those roads, right? So when they hire people within that, it simply means more individuals are employed, right? There is more employment, right? What does it mean when there is more employment? That means more people are getting paid. That means the money is flowing within the circular flow. When more people are employed, that means more people are getting, have an income, right? So what does it mean when more people have an income? It simply means more people will be able to buy goods. More people will be able to buy goods, right? the more people we have that are able to buy goods, it simple means the goods and services demand will increase, implying that the firms or the business sector needs to increase their production. And for them to be able to increase their production, they will need to hire more people. So the more expenditure we spend, the more goods we produce, and the more people are employed within the economy. That's the relationship between expenditure and goods. Going back to our essay, right? It says flows through the market. We have the real flow and the money flow, right? Then the real flow within this market, it is the flow of public goods and services accompanied by counterflows and expenditure of taxes on the product market, right? We continue, right? Factor services are real flows and they are accompanied by counterflows of income on the factor market, right? These are flows, right? They are flowing within the different markets, right? The first market is product market, which can also be known as the goods market. Then this is the factor market where the 4 factors of production are sold, right? Factors of production, right? In this, the first flow, right? We have the real flow, which is the flowing of goods and services, right, within the product market, right? Then we have the second flow, which is also the real flow. These are factors, services. The factors of production are flowing within the factor market, and we call it the real flow. I'm sure you see the difference, right? To make it clear, right, we have the 4 markets, right, which is the goods market, the factor market, the financial market, and okay, let me do the first 2 that are present here before I confuse you, right? The flow of private goods and services, it is known as the real flow within the product market, which is the goods market, right? Check the difference there, right? And then there's the factor service. It is also known as the real flow, right? These are flows within the factor market. Remember, the factor market, it is where we sell the factors of production, right? Import and exports are real flows accompanied by counterflows of the expenditure and revenue on the foreign exchange market, right? In this case, it's the imports and the exports that are flowing, right? And also remember, imports and exports are real flows. So these are flowing within the exchange market, the foreign exchange market. Remember that. And then we move to, we're still continuing, right? Its flows of private and public goods are real flows that are accompanied by counterflows, expenditure. So this is reputation, right? We're done with the flows. So we have real flows that are happening within the different markets, which is the foreign exchange market, the factor market, and the product market. Remember that all and through this market, there is no money flow that is happening within this market. There is only real flows that are happening in the product market, which is also known as the goods market. And then there's a factor market, and also a real flow is happening there, and also a foreign exchange market, and also a real flow is happening there. So within this market, there is no money flow that is happening within this. So remember our additional part that we had, which is 10 marks. It says evaluate the contribution or the role of firms in growing the economy. How do business contribute in growing the economy? Right. Your main points of this is the role of firms, which is businesses. Businesses, right? It's 10 marks. So it is evaluate. How do we evaluate? So in most cases, when we are evaluating, it usually has the negative side and the positive side of that. So let's continue. Right, the positive role. How do firms contribute, or what is the role that they play in growing the economy? Right. the firms. Remember, in our first lesson, we said what is the responsibility of firms. Firms buy the factors of production from the household. What does that mean? It simply means the firms employ people. That is how they buy the factors of production. Firms employ different factors of production, which includes employing the workers to produce the goods and services. That's the biggest role, the first role that they play. So the role that they play in growing the economy, obviously it is creating employment, right? Because this is an essay, you cannot just say it is they create employment. It's an essay, you are writing in an essay form, you are writing in paragraphs, not in point forms. Remember that. Right. By employing by employing labor, firms pay wages. Therefore, they create the flow of money within the circular flow, or the flow of income within the household, which is in return spent on goods and services that the firms produce. So the firms employ the household in form of buying the factors of production, and in turn they give the household an income. With that income, the household in turn go and purchase the goods and services that are produced by the firms. Right. Right. Also, further to that, it says firms develop new products and services to try to respond to consumer preferences and taste. Right. As households, our preferences are obviously influenced by the global world. So for firms, the firms needs to move with time. Moving with time, they need to obviously move and respond to the demand of the household, which might speak to preferences and taste. So they need to create those different products that seek the attention of the household. That's then this part, it also gives the demand of them buying local instead of them importing more goods. Because remember, for us to import, we use foreign currency, and in that it means there is a leakage within our circular flow, because when we are importing, money is leaving the country. We are buying it, it's leaving our circular flow, going to the foreign country circular flow. So for them to be moving with time and speaking to preferences and taste, it is also seeking for them to keep money moving within or flowing within the circular flow. For example, in increase to demand for coffee, right? Firms have opened new stores to cater for the new demand. They also involve offering, say, new services such as home delivery and by supermarkets. So it's home delivery by supermarkets. Remember, with time, we're moving with time. So the consumer taste and preferences are influenced by the global world, right? For those firms to be able to keep up with the global trends, they need to obviously develop new products and also try to have services. For example, remember, it's the Checker stores, I think, developed, it's the 60/60 app. So the 60/60 app, the consumer does not need to be present at the shop. The consumer only sends or downloads the app, sends the list of the groceries that they need, and then the shop will deliver those goods. That's moving with times, obviously, with consumer preferences and tastes. We'll move with that. Right. Then firms invest capital and new technology to improve productivity in the economy and ultimately a higher living costs. Right. This is the one that I just given an example. So, right, they invest in capital. Obviously, some firms develop apps to improve their services and also improve the productivity in the economy. That's what it means. Right. Firms provide goods and services for the consumer, which has enabled greater specialization in the economy. Right. That's one of the roles that they play. For example, labor-saving devices such as washing machines, vacuum cleaners, childcare have saved time for household chores, enabling women to enter into the labor force in greater numbers. Right. This simple means the firms have come up with ways to lessen the work or also improve the standard of living. Right. For example, we have washing machines, we have daycare services, we have vacuum cleaners. That means this most women is it traditional known that they're responsible for the house chores do not have to spend more time doing this at this point. It enables more women to be in the labor force. That's improving the standard of living within the country. Right. Right. And the other thing, the other role that they play, remember we said they pay taxes, which is a form of leakage within the secular law. Right. The reason why taxes are regarded as a leakage, it is the fact that the people that are contributing to these taxes or that are paying these taxes do not have a direct benefit to these taxes. Yes, they do benefit, but the benefits are not direct to them. Right. How so? Right. The firms pay taxes to the government. The government then in turn produce public goods. Right. Public goods which include, these are public roads, the social services, the health, and the education. Right. This point says firms pay taxes which contribute to the social welfare of the government, pays its citizens to ensure economic development. Right. Remember, obviously, we have the social grants which are paid by the government. So these taxes contribute to that. And also, how do these firms benefit from that? It's the infrastructure that the government builds with these the roads, mainly the roads. Right. Right. We said when we are evaluating, it can either be positive or negative. Right. We've moved to the negative role. Right. Production by firms may lead to negative externalities of production, e.g., pollution and loss of natural resources. Right. Obviously, if the more the country is industrialized, the more the pollution is there. So the more that we have these firms, that means the higher the pollution that we have, and also some natural resources can become extinct. So we can lose some natural resources due to what? Industrialization. So it has a negative role, though it has a positive role. So it also contributes to the negativity of pollution and also loss of our natural resources. Right. Firms with monopoly power can charge excessive prices and cause an efficient allocation of resources. Right. You did markets. You're going to do markets with time when you move. So you will remember monopolies. Right. What is a monopoly? And a monopoly, it is a one firm that has total control of a certain resource or of a certain product. Right. For example, we have it's Eskom. Eskom is an example of a monopoly. We have it's DBS. We have DBS Diamonds. It's an example of a monopoly. Right. With monopoly, it simply means that certain firm, it is the only firm that produce that product. It is the only firm within that market. It's a monopoly. Right. With having a monopoly, it simply means it's either that company or the highway. So this means they have more power. Them having more power, it means they can charge excessive prices and also cause an efficient allocation of resources. So that's what it simply means. So if one person has power, that means they have the ability to control almost everything within that market and also within them producing that product. So prices can end up being excessive, and also the resident or the consumers can end up not having enough of that resource that is being produced by that certain monopoly. Right. Firms which are publicly owned and supplying essential services may struggle to increase profits, which can lead to regular bailouts from the state. One perfect example from this is the SAA, the South African Airways. At this moment, okay, the previously, let me not say, remember the SAA is no longer a state owned, it was recently privatized, right? So previously, I do not remember how many bailouts did we have to, as a country, bail out the SAA as a state-owned company. Right, the SAA was struggling to make any profit. It was being bailed out every financial year, so it was not making any profit. So firms which are public owned and supplying essential services may struggle to increase profits, which can lead to regular bailouts from the state. XAA is a perfect example for that. Right. And also remember, SAA is no longer state-owned. They sold 51% of their shares to a private company. So as a state, we only own 49% of that. Right. Then we move to the conclusion. Right. It says the secular flow ensures a continued interdependence and coordination of the economic activities in the economy. Markets are critically important to institutions in our market system because they regulate the supply and demand and safeguard price stability and general business confidence. Right. What this means is, right, the fact that you have a secular flow, right, it simply means we are dependent on each other. This is the consumers, the household, the firms, and the government, right? This simply means if the firms are not dependent or are not dependent on consumers, that means they will have no one to purchase the goods and services that they need. And then if the government is independent from the firms, that means firms will be able to do their own thing and not dependent. Now it is a requirement for them to pay taxes. This allows the government to produce the public goods. Or we can say markets are critically important to institutions in our economic system because they regulate supply and demand and safeguard the stable prices and confidence among business people. That was the end of our essay from the previous lesson. Discuss. Right. Today we will start with a new topic, which is the national aggregates account. Right. Within the national aggregates account, we have a few definitions that you need to know, which is the basic price, the GDP, the GNP, the expenditure method, the income method, and the market price. Right. Do not forget to send your questions to 064 748 8913. The number is 064 748 8913. Right. Other terms include subsidies on production, subsidies on products, taxes, taxes on production, taxes on products, and production method. Right. What are basic prices? Basic prices include taxes on production and exclude subsidies on production. Right. What is the gross domestic product? When you are writing this, the GDP, do not stay away from writing the GDP. Write it in full as the gross domestic product unless stated otherwise. right? It's the gross domestic product. It is the total market value of all final goods and services produced within the borders of a country within a specific period, right? This can be it's usually a year, right? What is the gross national product? It is the total market value of all goods and services produced by permanent citizens of a country for a specific period. Remember the difference, right, between the GNP and the GDP, which is the gross domestic product and the gross national product, right? The GDP, it is the total value of all goods and services produced within the borders of a country for a specific period, right? Then the gross national product, this is the total market value of all final goods produced by the permanent citizens of a country within a specific period of time. These the GDP is produced within the borders of a country for a specific period of time, right? And then the expenditure method. What is expenditure method? It is a method whereby we determine the GDP at market prices by adding the spending of the four main sectors, right? Remember the sectors: the primary sector, the secondary sector, etc., right? Right. And then the income method. It is a method whereby we determine the GDP by adding up all the money earned by household as remunerations for the factors of production. Remember, the household get an income from the firms for their factors of production. So this is the income method. It is a method whereby we determine the gross domestic product by adding up all the money earned by the household as remuneration for the factors of production. And then we move to the market price. Market price is the price paid by consumers and for goods and services, including taxes less subsidies. What does this mean? It says it is the price that is paid by consumers for goods and services, including the taxes minus subsidies. That's what that less means. It says minus subsidies. Right. And then it's subsidies on production. Right. What are subsidies on production? This refers to subsidies that are not linked to goods and services. These, for example, these are subsidies made on employment. Right. Move to the next terminology. It says subsidies on products. This refers to subsidies that are linked to specific goods and services, e.g., government subsidy on bread. Right. This simply means the government can subsidize bread. Remember, what is a subsidy? It is a certain amount paid to whether it's a certain production or product. That's the subsidy. This is to lower the prices for that certain product to be affordable for the citizens of the country. Right. Taxes. Compulsory payments made by private individuals or businesses to the government sector with no direct benefit. Remember that we said taxes are paid by private individuals or businesses to the government, and they have no direct benefit. That the only direct benefit that they get, it is the use of the public goods that are produced by the government sector. Right. And then taxes on production refers to taxes that are not linked to a specific goods or services. For example, taxes on land and business, payroll taxes, payee, and business licenses. Right. Taxes on product refers to taxes that are linked to a specific goods and services. For example, as the VAT and import duties. Then the production method. It is a method where we determine GDP by adding the value added at each stage of the production process. Let's continue. The national account aggregates and conventions. What are these? National form part of the microeconomics and consists of accounting records of the country's total production, income, and expenditure. This simply means it includes all of the products that we produced as a country, the whole total production that we have produced as a country, and all the money that we've earned as a country, and all the money that we have used as a country, which is the expenditure. That's what it includes, the national account, right? The national accounts aggregates are calculating by using the circular flow model. Remember what we said with the circular flow model. It is a four sector model, right? Within the four sector model, remember I also explained that we have what we call leakages and injections, right? In injections, we have, it is the government expenditure, it is the exports, and also investments. Then it will also make sense when I say this, when it comes to the definition, right? We also have leakages, right? We said leakages are savings, taxes, and import expenditure. Remember that. So the national account aggregates are calculating by using the circular flow model, right? We can bring the circular flow to life by translating the illustrated flows into real amounts and the amount that we find in our national account. Remember, so that simple means the investment, we can turn that into real amounts. For example, if we're going to say the government expenditure, the government spent certain 20,000, instead of calling it just expenditure, we can use the real amounts. So for example, the government expenditure, we say the government used 2 billion on this and this, that's the expenditure, right? Instead of it calling by words, we can also use the real amount, right? That are presented in the national account, right? The national account are prepared by the South African Reserve Bank. You can find these accounts on the SRB website, which is the www.resbank.co.za. Right, remember to send your questions on 064 748 8913. Right, the estimates are generally presented in line with the classifications and definitions recommended by the United Nations systems of national accounts. So when these are prepared, they are prepared according to the United Nations systems of national accounts. That is how the South African Reserve Bank prepare those national accounts. Right. The national accounts, the three economic processes represent the three methods of calculating the GDP and the main national accounts. Namely, one, it is the production method, which is gross domestic product, GDP, represented by P. Then the income method, which is gross domestic income, represented by I, right? And then expenditure method, it's the gross domestic expenditure, GDP, represented by E, right? Why do we need the national accounts? Why do we need the national accounts? Right. The national account indicate the economic activities that are happening within a country. So it encompasses all the economic that are happening within a country, and they're all indicated in the national account, right? Measuring growth, measuring economic growth from one year to the next. So with those national accounts that are recorded, we are able to measure the growth of our economy from one year to another, right? Determine the standard of living in a country. Right. With also the national accounts, we can also determine whether the standard of living in a country, is it high or is it low, right? It also compare prosperity levels among the country, right? We at first does this the standard of living, and also compares the prosperity levels among the country, right? Those are the uses of the national account. One, it indicates the economic activities. It measures the growth. We are able to know the growth of the economy within the country from year to year. It also we are able to determine the standard of living, and also compares prosperity among the country, right? We said, going back here, we have how many methods of calculating this? It's the three: production method, income method, and expenditure method. These three methods. All right, let's continue. Right, the expenditure method, right? It is consumption expenditure by household, which is represented by the letter C, right? Then there's gross capital formation, which is represented by letter I. Then consumption expenditure by general government is represented by the letter G. Then there is the gross domestic expenditure plus exports minus imports. That's what the less mean, right? Expenditure on GDP at market price, right? The production method, it says it's value added by primary sector. Remember the four sectors, the sectors that we had, right? And then the value added by the secondary sector, value added by the tertiary sector. And then at GDP at basic prices plus taxes on products minus subsidies on products. Then it gives us the gross domestic product at market price, right? Income method. Includes this. It's compensation to employees, consumption to fixed capital, operating surpluses, GDP at factor cost, plus taxes on production minus subsidies on production, GDP at basic price plus taxes on production minus subsidies on products, gross domestic product at market plus income, primary income from the rest of the world, less income to the rest of the world, right? This income from the rest of the world, these are South African citizens that are living outside of South Africa, right? And then primary income to the rest of the world. The reason we are separating this, it is the primary income to the rest of the world. This is the money earned by non-South African citizens that are living within the country, right? That gives us the gross national income at market prices, right? We do the national accounts, the expenditure method. This is explained what we've been previously explaining on the previous slide. This is further explained on this slide. Right. It is the consumption expenditure by household, gross capital information represented by letter I, consumption expenditure by general government, G, gross domestic expenditure plus exports represented by letter X, minus imports represented by letter M, right? That gives us expenditure on GDP at market price. All right. We moved this, right? It says this is GDP on expenditure, right? It measures total expenditure of final goods and services produced within the borders of a country, right? GDP of expenditure is equal to C, which is consumption, plus I, which is the gross capital formation, and G, which is the government expenditure, and plus export minus import. That gives us the expenditure on GDP market at market prices, right? Remember that it's expenditure on GDP at market prices. It is C plus I plus G plus X minus Z. Why is it a Z instead of, okay. Right, the expenditure method, we did this, right. Conversions of domestic figures to national figures, right. It's for us, GDP prices is equals to plus factor income earned abroad by South Africans minus factor income earned in South Africa equals to GNI at, remember what we said GNI is, it is the final market value of products and services produced by permanent citizens of a country for a certain period. Remember that, right. And then GNI at market price and GDP at market price. It is plus a factor income earned by abroad by South Africans minus factor income earned in South Africa, right. So for this, we are going to obviously add the money that is earned by South Africans that are living abroad, separating the money or the factor income earned in South Africa, the money that is earned by people living within South Africa. It gives us the GNI at market price. Remember that. It is the permanent, when you're speaking of permanent citizens, these are permanent citizens that are living outside South Africa, right. Right, it says production method, output value added method. It says production takes place in the primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. Those, remember the primary raw materials, this one manufacturing, and then the tertiary, obviously it's for services. Remember that, right. However, we cannot merely add all up the market values of all outputs of all participants, because such calculations will amount to double counting, right. Then therefore, since we cannot add all the market values, we have to separate the intermediate goods from the final goods. We find the value that was added by each sector. So we cannot add all the market values of all these goods, of all the production that has taken place in all of those three sectors, which is the primary, secondary, and tertiary sector. So we therefore have to subtract the intermediate goods from the final goods. We will then find the value that was added by each sector. Let's continue the components. The components of the production method. Remember the one that we're doing here, it was, all right, let's go back to this. We were doing the expenditure method, remember. So we are moving to the production method, right. The components of these, it is the value added by the primary sector, value added by the secondary sector, and the value added by the tertiary sector gives us the GDP at basic prices, right. Then we also add the taxes on products, subtracting the subsidies on products, right. Then it also will give us to the gross domestic product at market price, right. Remember this one. We are going to add the value added by each sector. Each sector, when we add those value added by each sector, which is the primary, secondary, and tertiary, it is going to give us the GDP at basic prices, right. We further add, after we get the GDP at basic prices, we are then going to add taxes on this product, right. We add, and then we therefore move in front and subtract the subsidies on products, right. Remember, when we're separating this, then it's going to give us the gross domestic product at market prices. Remember, if we do not add these taxes and subtract the subsidies, it gives us the GDP at basic prices. If we continue and add the taxes on products and subtract the subsidies on products, it gives us the GDP at market prices. Remember to send your questions to 064 748 8913. 064 748 8913. We're still on the production method. Let's continue. Right. The primary sector, this is what we're going to add the value. This it simply explains it. Right. We're going to add the value of the primary sector plus the secondary sector plus the tertiary sector. This is going to give us the GDP at basic prices. So as let's, for example, it's 20, right, 20, then it's going to give us, which is 60. This is the gross value added at basic prices, right? Then we further add, this is the GDP at basic prices, right? Right, and then we further add taxes on products. We further say it's 30, and then we subtract subsidies on products. Let's say it's 15. That's 15 rand. So that's 60 plus this, that's 90. Minus 15, it gives us 90 minus 15, 90 minus 15. Right, it's 10, that's 5. Here it becomes 75. Right. So it's going to be what? 75. Right, that's gross domestic product at market price. That's how much it's going to give us. So that's how it is. We first add the value of all the three sectors, which is going to give us the GDP at basic price. Then we continue to add taxes on products and subtract subsidies on products. It's going to give us the GDP at market price. Let's erase all. Right. We did the expenditure method. We did the production method. We moved to the income method. Remember, there's the three of these. Right. The GDI adds together the income earned by the owners of the factors of production. Remember, who are these? The household. The household. They are the owners of factors of production. Right. So it adds together the income earned by the owners of production. Right. Remember the owners of production, right? The employees. Right. It's the compensation of employees plus net operating surplus plus consumption of fixed capital. This will give us the gross value added at factor cost. So it is the compensation of employees, net operating surplus, consumption at fixed capital. It gives us the gross value added at factor cost. Right. We further add other taxes on production minus other subsidies on production. That will give us the gross value added at basic prices. When we add taxes on product and less minus subsidies on products, it will give us the gross domestic at market price, which is the GDI. That is how we get to that. Right. Income method. It's the compensation of employees, one, consists mainly of gross salaries and wages. Right. Net operating surplus, two, includes mainly the total value of goods and services that are produced less cost. Cost has three elements, right? Cost of intermediate goods and services, cost of remuneration of employees, and cost of consumption of fixed capital. Right. The net operating surplus shows profit and surpluses before taxation. Remember that the net operating surplus, it shows a profit before they are taxed, before taxation happens. Right. Then we can have short questions. These are activities that are going to follow. Right. Remember to send your questions to 064 748 8913. The number is 064 748 8913. Right. It says consumption of fixed capital is used to calculate GDP at, is it basic prices, market prices, selling prices, D, factor cost. what its consumption of fixed capital is used to calculate GDP at A, basic prices, B, market prices, C, selling prices, D, at factor cost. The answer is D, at factor cost. That's what consumption of fixed capital is used to calculate GDP at. Right, we move to the next question. It says, when I, right, remember this. We said they are, go back to the circular flow. These are injections and leakages. Right, injections and leakages. Right, remember we use the letter J and L. Right, it says when injections are greater than leakages, the level of national income will, right, remember it's investment, government expenditure, and exports, is greater than savings, or is it's less than savings, taxes, and import expenditure. Right, the national income will A, rise, B, fall, C, remain the same, D, fluctuate. The answer is A. The national income will rise. Right. Question. It says taxes on subsidies on dash are considered when calculating the GDP at basic prices. Taxes on subsidies on are calculating when calculating the GDP at basic prices. Right. One. Let's remember what the GDP is. It says the GDP, it is the final market value of all the goods and services produced in a country for a certain period. So the answers are A, exports, B, production, C, commodities, D, import. The answer is B, on production. Remember, GDP, it is the market final value of goods and services produced in a country at a certain period. Right. Then we have to move to, these are short questions. We did the multiple choice. Remember, our question paper, we said it has multiple choice, short questions, higher order questions, and also essay questions. These are short questions that usually come, you have to answer them in sentences, not in point forms. Remember that. How will the scenario I plus G plus X is greater than S plus M plus T affect the national income? We did this on the multiple choice. It says the national income will rise because the injections are larger than leakages. Remember, the injections, it is the additional of money within the circular flow. Right. And then the leakages, it is the withdrawal of money within the circular flow. So the question is, how will the scenario where leakages are less than injections affect the national income? Or how will, what is the effect of higher injections compared to lesser leakages into the national income? It's simple. The national income will rise because injections are larger than leakages. The question that follows, it says, what effect does taxes and subsidies have on the calculation of basic prices? What are taxes? Taxes, this is a required payment made by individuals and businesses to the government sector. Subsidies, these are prices that are money that is paid for prices, whether prices to go less, to make prices goods and services more affordable. Right. It says, what effect does taxes and subsidies have on the calculation of basic price? It will convert basic prices to the gross domestic product at GDP. Remember, when we are calculating the basic price, it is less taxes and less subsidies. Remember that. So we calculate that, and then, but when we're calculating it, it is less it is less taxes on the product and less subsidies on the product. So when we are calculating that, after calculating the basic price, it will give us the basic price without the taxes, and then we therefore have to add the taxes and subtract the subsidies for us to get the product at market price. Remember that. It says, why does SAFCN prescribe to the systems of national account as stipulated by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF? Right. Right. It says SA must comply with international best practices in terms of the provision of national accounts data. Right. Why do we subscribe to that? There is we must comply with the international practices in terms of the provisions by the national accounts data. That is why we must prescribe to those. Right. The question that follows, it says, what is the purpose of the residual items when the expenditure method is used to calculate the national income? What is the purpose of the residual item when the expenditure method is used to calculate the national income? The residual item takes into account errors and omissions that may have occurred in order to balance the GDP and the GDI equations, right? So the residual item, right, it takes into account errors and omissions that may have occurred in order to balance the GDP and the GDI equation. That's 2 marks. We move. Right. It says, what is the main purpose of subsidies on the production? Right. As I've mentioned before, right, the main purpose of subsidies, it is to reduce the cost of production. That is the main purpose of subsidies. So it means when a certain product it is reduced, it is subsidized, it means the cost of that certain product will be less, right? Also to encourage the production of exports. So for example, the government will subsidize certain companies, then those companies that are subsidized, they can produce more. That means when we are producing more, we can obviously export more. All right, subsidies will benefit the consumer or increase the production of certain goods. Right, this simple means if a price or a production is subsidized, that means it will cost less compared to what it will have cost without the subsidy. So that means the consumers will benefit from the subsidy, right? Further, if certain productions are subsidized, that means there is a higher chance that most products are going to be in the production of other products are going to be increased, right? Then national aggregates, these are paragraph questions that are usually come in 8 marks. Right, it says differentiate between taxes on production and taxes on product. What are taxes on production? These are taxes that are imposed on firms during the production process, right? It does not depend on the actual value of the product. For example, it's payroll taxes, recurring taxes, land and buildings, and other registration fees and stamp duties. So these taxes are imposed on firms during the production. When the production of the product is happening, this is when these taxes are imposed on the firms. Right. The other content, then we said it's taxes on production. It's differentiate between taxes on production and taxes on products. Taxes on products, these are taxes paid on finished products, right? Product taxes are paid on the actual volume of the product. It is paid per unit. For example, it is the excise duty, service tax, sales tax. It is paid per unit of the product. Remember that, right? So the difference between these, right? The taxes on production are paid during the production of the products, right? And then taxes on products, these are taxes that are paid on finished products, right? So you pay taxes during the production of a product, and then when taxes on product, these are taxes that are paid on a finished product. When the production is done, the product is finished. It's usually, remember this question usually comes in 8 marks, so remember that it's also answered in paragraphs, right? It says differentiate between subsidies on production and subsidies on product, right? Remember, subsidies are made, products are subsidized so that they can cost less or to increase the production of a certain product, right? What is a subsidy on production? Right. A production subsidy is a payment made by government to firms in an industry based on output or production. Right. Subsidies on is used to stimulate output for a good due to a strategic importance. Right. So, for example, the government will subsidize, let's for instance, a company that is producing a product that is in need, right? Within that, so for a company to produce more, the government will decide to subsidize that company. That means they are subsidizing a certain production to produce that certain products at that period of time, right? At subsidies on production, it is used to stimulate output for a good due to its strategic importance, right? Further move on that. The question is differentiate between subsidies on production and subsidies on products, right? Subsidies on products, we did the subsidies on production. Remember, they subsidize the production of a certain good because of its strategic importance, right? Subsidies on products are subsidies payable per unit of a good or service produced or imported. A subsidy on a product usually becomes payable when the good is produced, sold, or imported, right? The subsidy may be a specific amount of the subsidy may be a specific amount of money per unit, right? Subsidy on production is government subsidize a certain production of a certain product, right? Because of its strategic importance, right? Here, when they're subsidizing products, right, they subsidize a certain finished good, right? They subsidize payable per unit. It is not the entire good that is produced within that production. So they subsidize per unit, right? Whether the product is produced or sold or imported, that is when they subsidize, right? And then it's obviously it's a man that is paid per unit of that, right? The question is, how is expenditure related to income and production? This question is approximately the same question that we did yesterday, or the same question that I answered when we started our lesson on the question that was asked, is how is expenditure related to goods? Our question here says, how is expenditure related to income and production? Right. Here we have an example. It says if government decides to embark on a big infrastructure project, such as bus lanes, in a major city, which is either Pretoria or Johannesburg, right? This simply means the project will require additional workers who will in turn earn an income, right? These individuals that have now have income will use their income to purchase goods and services. Remember, I said we are interdependent of each other. That simply means the government spends on a certain program, right? And in turn, obviously, hires certain people, right? The government, remember, we are participants within this circular flow, right? And then, so we are dependent of each other. So the product will require more employees who in turn earn an income. Then those individuals that have an income then will therefore in turn purchase goods and services which are produced by the firm, right? This will stimulate the demands of goods and services, which will lead to increased production. For production to increase, and obviously it will need additional employees. That means, therefore, the firms will need more employees in producing these goods and services. Right, and then these employees will also add at a greater demand, which will increase levels of production, which in turn increase the levels of employment and income, stimulating greater consumer demand. In end, it means the expenditure that is spent will increase the levels of employment within the country. The levels of employment will also increase the income levels within the household, therefore increasing the levels of demand when it comes to products. The increased demand on products will lead to increased production within the firms. That's what all says in a nutshell. That's 8 marks, right? It says, how is gross domestic product, which is GDP at market price, derived by using the expenditure method? We did the expenditure method, right? It says expenditure method on GDP measures the total expenditure of final goods and services produced within the borders of the country, right? That's what the expenditure at GDP on measures, right? The expenditure on GDP, right? It measures the total expenditure on final goods and services produced within the borders of the country. Right. It is calculating by adding together expenditure of the participants in an open economy, right? These are households, states, and businesses, right? Remember, it is good. It measures, right? Remember, all the final goods, services produced within the borders of the country, right? These borders of the country. So the next point follows. It says it is calculating by adding together expenditures of the participants in an open economy, which are households, states, and businesses. The borders and these 3 participants, right? So, right, it is calculating by adding together the expenditures of the participants in an open economy, which are households, states, and businesses, right? The households spend on durable goods, semi-durable goods, and non-durable goods. Right. Then, how is gross domestic product, which is GDP at market price, derived by using expenditure method? This one continues, right? We said the household spend on semi-durable goods and durable goods. Then the state spends on public goods, right? The public goods, remember those. And then a business spends on capital good, right? The residual item is included as balancing item, right? The exports of the foreign sector are added and the imports are subtracted. The exports of the foreign sector are added and the imports are subtracted. Remember, when we're expecting, and that means the income is coming on the other side of the country, right? where GDP equals to C, which is consumption, government, plus I plus X, which is exports minus imports. It's GDP of expenditure equals to C plus G plus I plus X minus M. Right. It says the national accounts of South Africa at market price. Right. 2018 and 29. That's the data response, the question that we have on data response. Remember that. It's compensation of employees, which is 2,320,000. Okay, the values, these values are not important. Let's move to the questions. The question is study the information below and answer the questions. What method of calculation was used in the table above calculating the gross domestic product? The answer is income method. Right. And name the missing item labeled A. All right. What is the missing item labeled A? Right. Let's move. Right. Remember, we said we firstly add all of the above these, and then they will give us its GDP at basic price, right? And then when we add taxes and subtract subsidies, it gives us GDP at market price. Remember that. So the missing part there is gross domestic product at basic price. So the missing name the missing item labeled A. It's GDP at basic prices. It says briefly describe the item net operating surplus. It is after the tax surplus of the remuneration of the factors of production. Right. What is the net operating surplus? This is after tax surplus of the remuneration of. So the net, it is the minus the taxes surplus of the remuneration of the factors of production. That was the net surplus, operating surplus. It's 2 marks. Right. It says, why was the subsidy on products in 2019 less than the subsidies on products in 2019? We do not have much of time, so I cannot go back to the table. Let us continue. It says the government could have reduced the number of subsidies per unit on a good or services produced or imported. So that is the reason. So the government might decide to reduce the number of subsidies per unit on a good. Remember, we said when they are subsidizing a product, they subsidized per unit, not then when they're subsidizing a production, they subsidize a production of a certain good. Remember that. Then it says calculate the compensation of employees as a percentage at GDP market price. We do not have time. It says it's show calculations. It's 2,418,544 divided by 5,077,625 times 100 divided by 1, which gives us 47.63. Right. Remember to show all calculations when doing this. The next question, we do not have much time. Right. It says which method was used in calculating of the gross domestic product GDP above. It's the production method or the value added method, right? And which year is currently used at the basic year by the South African Reserve Bank? It is the SARB. Remember to send your questions to 064 748 8913. We've come to the end of our today's lesson. Thank you for watching this lesson. Remember to sanitize, wear your mask, maintain social distance, and keep safe. Till we meet again. Thank you.